I sat in the mahogany-paneled law office of Peterson and Associates, watching my sister Amanda fidget with her designer purse while our parents whispered excitedly. The lawyer, Mr. Peterson, adjusted his glasses and opened the thick envelope containing Grandpa Harold's will. My heart pounded as I remembered his final words 3 months ago. "Don't worry, kiddo. Everything will work out exactly as it should." The room fell silent except for the ticking grandfather clock. I had no idea my entire world was about to crumble, then transform in the most unexpected way imaginable. The morning started wrong from the moment I walked into Peterson and Associates. I'd arrived 30 minutes early, hoping to catch Mr. Peterson privately and maybe understand what Grandpa Harold had really intended. The waiting room smelled like leather and old money, with its burgundy chairs and oil paintings of stern-faced judges from decades past. I kept checking my phone, rehearsing what I might say if the will contained any surprises. When my parents arrived with Amanda, everything felt staged. Dad wore his most expensive suit, the charcoal gray one he saved for board meetings. Mom had chosen her pearl necklace and black dress combination that screamed sophistication. Amanda bounced in wearing a designer outfit that probably cost more than my monthly rent, her blonde hair perfectly styled, despite claiming she'd just rolled out of bed. The contrast wasn't lost on me. I'd worn my best khakis and a button-down shirt, but next to them, I looked like someone who'd wandered in from the suburbs, which technically I had. "Stephen, darling, you look nervous," Mom said, adjusting her lipstick in a compact mirror. "There's really nothing to worry about. Grandfather always took care of family." Her tone carried that familiar edge, like she was explaining something simple to a child. Dad checked his Rolex twice before settling into his chair. "Margaret's right, son. Harold knew what he was doing. He built that business from nothing after all." The way he said it suggested Dad thought he might be getting a piece of that business himself. Amanda barely looked up from her phone. "Can we just get this over with? I have lunch plans at 12:30. She was texting someone furiously, probably her boyfriend Derek, who spent his trust fund money on sports cars and weekend trips to Las Vegas. I thought about all those Saturday mornings I'd spent with Grandpa Harold at his original hardware store on Maple Street, while Amanda slept until noon, and my parents played golf at the country club I'd helped him organize inventory, learn about profit margins, and understand what it meant to treat employees like family. Harold had started with that single store in 1972 and built it into a chain of 12 locations across 3 counties. He taught me everything about running a business. I told friends, though, they never seemed particularly impressed. Success in our family was measured differently. Amanda's achievements were celebrated loudly. Her sorority presidency, her art history degree from an expensive private college, her engagement to Derek, whose father owned a chain of car dealerships, my business degree from the state university, and my job managing a small electronics store barely registered on their radar. Mr. Peterson entered the conference room carrying a stack of documents that seemed thick enough to contain the Constitutional Convention records. He was younger than I'd expected, maybe 45, with salt and pepper hair and wire-rimmed glasses that made him look scholarly rather than intimidating. "Good morning, Thompson family. I know this is a difficult time, but Harold left very specific instructions about how this reading should proceed." He arranged papers methodically, creating separate piles that seemed to correspond to different parts of the will. The formalities began with charitable donations. Grandpa Harold had left $50,000 to the local children's hospital, $25,000 to the animal shelter, where he'd volunteered every Thursday for the past 8 years, and smaller amounts to various community organizations. Each announcement made my parents shift impatiently in their chairs. "When do we get to the real stuff?" Amanda whispered, loud enough for everyone to hear. Mom shushed her, but not before exchanging a meaningful glance with Dad. They were like actors who'd rehearsed this scene but weren't quite pulling off the grieving family performance. Employee bequests came next. Harold had remembered every long-term worker from store managers to the part-time cashier, who'd been with him for 15 years. Each person received enough money to make a real difference. College funds for their kids, down payments on houses, or simply the security of knowing someone had valued their loyalty. "Your grandfather was very thorough," Peterson noted, consulting his papers. "He spent considerable time ensuring everyone who helped build his success would be recognized." Then came the moment that changed everything. For Amanda Rose Thompson. Peterson announced, his voice carrying across the silent room. The sum of $7 million to be transferred immediately upon probate completion. The explosion of joy from my family was instantaneous. Dad actually pumped his fist in the air like he'd won the lottery. Mom clapped her hands together and let out a little squeal of delight. Amanda dropped her phone and screamed, immediately calling someone before Peterson had even finished reading her section. "Oh my God, Derek, you're not going to believe this," she shrieked into her phone. "$7 million? We can buy that house in Malibu?" I sat frozen, watching this celebration unfold around me. $7 million. The number felt surreal, like something from a movie rather than my actual life. I'd known Grandpa Harold was wealthy, but seeing that kind of money materialize in real time left me stunned. "Stephen," Peterson said, and suddenly all eyes turned to me. The room fell quiet except for Amanda, still chattering excitedly in the background. He held up a small envelope, nothing like the thick legal documents he'd been reading from earlier. "For Stephen Harold Thompson, the sum of $5 along with this note." Peterson opened the envelope and read in his professional voice, "Go earn your own way, just like I did." The silence lasted exactly 3 seconds before my family erupted in laughter. Dad slapped his knee like he'd just heard the best joke of his life. Mom covered her mouth with her hand, but her shoulders shook with barely contained mirth. Amanda looked up from her phone call long enough to point at me and giggle. "Oh, Stephen," Mom said, wiping tears from her eyes. "Well, some kids just don't measure up, do they?" I suppose Harold knew exactly who had the real potential in this family. The words hit me like a physical blow. $5. 5 actual dollars, while my sister got 7 million. The note felt like a slap across the face, dismissing 28 years of my life as worthless. All those weekends learning the business, all those conversations about integrity and hard work, all those times Harold had called me kiddo and told me he was proud of me. Apparently, it had meant nothing. I started to stand up, ready to leave this humiliation behind and figure out how to rebuild my shattered sense of self-worth. The $5 bill felt heavy in my hand, like it carried the weight of every time my family had made me feel inadequate. Just as I reached for the door handle, Peterson cleared his throat loudly. "Ladies and gentlemen, please remain seated. There appears to be a sealed letter marked to be read only after the initial distribution. This is highly unusual, but Mr. Harold Thompson's instructions were very specific about the timing." Peterson reached for an ornate envelope I hadn't noticed before, separate from all the other legal documents. The wax seal bore Harold's initials, and I could see his distinctive handwriting on the outside, "The Truth About Family." My hands began shaking as I recognized the careful script I'd seen on countless birthday cards and Christmas gifts over the years. The lawyer broke the seal with ceremonial care, unfolding what appeared to be several pages of Harold's personal stationery. The room had gone completely silent. Amanda had even hung up her phone call, sensing something significant was about to happen. "This letter is addressed to everyone present," Peterson announced, adjusting his glasses. Mr. Thompson's instructions specify that I read it aloud in its entirety, immediately following the distribution announcements. He began reading in Harold's voice, or at least what Harold's voice might sound like, filtered through a lawyer's professional delivery. "If you're hearing this, it means my initial will has been read, and I imagine there are some very happy people in that room, and one very hurt young man." I felt every eye in the room turn toward me. Amanda's expression shifted from triumph to confusion. "What does that mean?" she asked. "Is there more money coming?" Mom reached over and shushed her, but I could see uncertainty creeping into her confident expression. Peterson continued, "What I've just done is not my real will. It was a test, a final examination of character that I've been planning for 2 years ever since my heart attack made me realize I needed to understand who my family really was before I died." The words hit the room like a bomb. Dad's face went white. Mom's hand flew to her throat. Amanda's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air, but no sound came out. "Steve, my boy," Peterson read, and I felt Harold's presence in the room as strongly as if he were sitting right next to me. "I needed to see how your family would treat you when they thought you had nothing. I needed to know whether the cruelty I'd witnessed over the years was real or whether love would triumph when it mattered most." My mind reeled as I tried to process what I was hearing. The $5 wasn't an insult. It was part of an elaborate test. But what kind of test required humiliating someone so completely? I thought about all the times my family had dismissed my ideas, laughed at my dreams, or simply acted like I didn't exist when more interesting people were around. Well, no. The reactions in that room just confirmed what I'd suspected for years. Peterson continued reading. "Some of you celebrated another person's supposed misfortune. Some of you used this moment to deliver cruel observations about worth and measurement. And some of you said things that revealed the true nature of your hearts." I could see Mom's hands trembling. Dad had loosened his tie and was staring at the table like he might find escape routes carved into the wood grain. Amanda kept looking back and forth between Peterson and her parents, clearly lost and increasingly panicked. Peterson reached for a second document much thicker than the first. "This is Harold Thompson's actual will, properly sealed and witnessed. The previous reading was indeed a test, as Mr. Thompson explains in the remainder of his letter." The lawyer's voice took on a different tone as he continued, "I want everyone in that room to understand that I've been paying attention, not just to your words, but to your actions over many years. Steve, you probably don't realize how many conversations I overheard, how many cruel comments were made when you weren't around, how many times your achievements were dismissed or minimized." This was getting surreal. Harold had been listening. Recording how much did he actually know about how I'd been treated? "Dad, what's happening?" Amanda's voice cracked with genuine fear. "This can't be legal. You can't just change a will after someone dies." Peterson held up his hand for silence. The letter continues, "I've been recording every family gathering for the past 18 months, Steve. Every cruel comment, every dismissive laugh, every time they treated you as less than human. I have documentation of birthday parties where they forgot yours, holiday dinners, where they mocked your dreams and conversations, where they actually planned to ask me to remove you from my will entirely. The bottom fell out of my world. Harold had recordings. He'd been documenting years of family dysfunction. I tried to remember recent gatherings, wondering what exactly he'd captured and how much evidence existed of my family's treatment. This is impossible," Dad said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Harold never said anything about recordings. He never confronted us about anything." "The letter addresses that point," Peterson replied, turning to a new page. "I never confronted any of you because I wanted to see your true characters, not performances designed to impress me. I wanted to understand who you really were when you thought no consequences existed." Mom had gone completely pale. "Stephen, sweetheart, you have to understand that families tease each other. We never meant anything serious by any of our comments. We love you." But Peterson wasn't finished reading. "I believe the most telling moment came last Christmas, when Steve announced he'd been promoted to district manager at his company. Instead of celebrating his success, Margaret immediately changed the subject to Amanda's engagement photos. Richard made that comment about some people being satisfied with small achievements, and Amanda actually rolled her eyes and said she didn't understand why anyone would be excited about working in retail. I remembered that moment with crystal clarity. I'd been so proud of my promotion, the first real recognition I'd received in my professional life. The salary increase meant I could finally afford a decent apartment, maybe even start saving for a house. But my family's reaction had been so dismissive that I'd spent the rest of Christmas dinner wondering if I was overreacting to what really was a pretty modest achievement. The recordings show a pattern. Peterson continued, of systematic emotional abuse disguised as family dynamics. Steve, you've been gaslighted for years into believing your achievements don't matter, your opinions aren't valuable, and your presence in this family is somehow optional. The word abuse hung in the air like smoke. I'd never thought of it that way, but hearing Harold's analysis spelled out so clearly made me realize how much damage had been done to my sense of self-worth over the years. Peterson set down the letter and reached for what appeared to be a tablet computer. Mr. Thompson's letter indicates that he prepared visual evidence to accompany this reading. He wanted everyone to see exactly what he witnessed, so there could be no denial or reinterpretation of events. Wait, Amanda said, panic clear in her voice. You're saying Grandpa was secretly recording us? That's illegal? That's invasion of privacy? Actually, Peterson replied calmly, recording conversations in one's own home is perfectly legal in this state as long as one party consents. Since Harold was present for all these interactions and consented to recording them, everything was done within the bounds of the law. He activated the tablet, and suddenly I was looking at Harold's living room from last Thanksgiving. The camera angle suggested it was hidden somewhere near the mantelpiece, providing a clear view of the entire main seating area. The video showed my 27th birthday celebration, which had been combined with Thanksgiving dinner for convenience. I watched myself sitting on Harold's couch, largely ignored, while my family discussed Amanda's plans for a European vacation with Derek. Oh God, Mom whispered, staring at the screen. On the video, I could see myself trying multiple times to join conversations only to be talked over or dismissed. At one point, I'd mentioned hoping to start my own business someday, and the recording captured Mom's response perfectly. Stephen, honey, some people are entrepreneurs, and some people are employees. There's nothing wrong with knowing which category you fall into. The cruelty was so casual, so automatic, that watching it felt like seeing myself get hit by a car in slow motion. I remembered how that comment had crushed my confidence for months afterward. But the worst part came at the end of the video when I'd gone to help Harold in the kitchen and my family thought they were alone. Amanda's voice came through crystal clear. I swear Steve gets more pathetic every year. Thank God Grandpa won't leave him much. Can you imagine him trying to run a business he'd probably bankrupt himself in 6 months? Dad's voice followed. At least we know where the real money's going. Amanda's got the personality and intelligence to handle a serious inheritance. Steve would just waste it on some stupid get-rich-quick scheme. And then Mom's voice, the one that cut deepest. I love Stephen, of course, but let's be realistic. He's always been the disappointment in this family. Thank goodness Harold recognizes that Amanda's the one with real potential. Watching this happen felt like dying and being reborn simultaneously. All my worst fears about what my family really thought of me were being confirmed in high-definition video. But somehow Harold had been there documenting it all, preparing to defend me in ways I'd never imagined possible. The tablet went dark and Peterson set it aside. Mr. Thompson wanted you all to see this evidence before we proceeded with the real will reading. He felt it was important for everyone to understand exactly why his actual decisions were made. Peterson pulled out additional files, each one labeled with dates and locations. Over the past 18 months, Harold collected extensive documentation of family interactions. These recordings span birthday parties, holiday gatherings, casual visits, and private conversations. The pattern they reveal is both consistent and deeply troubling. He activated the tablet again, showing another scene I recognized from Easter dinner 3 months ago. This time, the camera captured a conversation I hadn't been present for when I'd stepped outside to take a business call from my district manager. The call was about a potential promotion, Peterson explained, reading from Harold's notes. Steve had been selected for a regional training program that could lead to significant career advancement. He was excited to share this news with his family. On the screen, my family waited exactly 30 seconds after I left the room before Amanda started talking. Seriously, how long is Steve going to pretend he's going somewhere with his little retail career? It's embarrassing when people ask what my brother does for a living. Richard nodded in agreement. The boy means well, but he's never understood the difference between a job and a career. Some people are meant for management, and some people are meant to take orders. Margaret added the killing blow. I keep hoping he'll meet a nice girl who can help him aim higher, but what kind of successful woman would want someone so unambitious? Amanda found Derek, who comes from real money and has actual prospects. I felt sick watching this. While I'd been outside discussing opportunities for professional growth, my family had been inside, dismantling my character and dismissing my future. The casual cruelty was breathtaking in its completeness. Mr. Thompson noted something particular about this conversation. Peterson continued. When Steve returned to announce his selection for the regional program, watch the family's reactions. The video showed me coming back inside still energized from the phone call. Great news, everyone. I've been selected for a 6-month leadership development program. If I complete it successfully, I'll be in line for a regional manager position overseeing 15 stores across 4 states. The silence that followed was deafening. Amanda looked annoyed at having her conversation interrupted. Dad managed a week, "That's nice, son," before immediately changing the subject to golf scores. Mom actually checked her watch as if my announcement had been an unwelcome delay in more important activities. The contrast, Peterson read from Harold's notes, between how this family celebrates Amanda's minor social achievements and how they respond to Steve's genuine professional progress reveals everything about their true priorities and loyalties. But there was more. Peterson produced another tablet, this one, showing security footage from Harold's hardware store. Your grandfather also documented interactions at his business. Steve, you probably don't realize how often your family visited the store when you weren't there. The footage showed Amanda and Margaret browsing the store about 6 weeks ago. I could hear their conversation clearly through the store's security system. I can't believe Steve actually thinks he understands business, Amanda was saying, while examining a display of power tools. Grandpa's just being nice when he lets him help around here. Everyone knows retail is just babysitting for adults who can't handle real responsibility. Margaret picked up a paint can, inspecting the label. Harold's built something impressive here, but it takes real intelligence and social skills to maintain relationships with suppliers, manage complex operations, and make strategic decisions. Steve's a sweet boy, but he doesn't have what it takes for this level of responsibility. The camera angle shifted, revealing Harold himself, standing just around the corner, clearly listening to every word. His face showed a mixture of sadness and determination that made my chest tight. Mr. Thompson heard this conversation, and 17 others like it. Peterson explained. Family members regularly visited his business to criticize Steve's involvement and suggest that Amanda would be a better choice to inherit the company. My hands clenched into fists. They'd been actively campaigning against me, trying to convince Harold that I wasn't worthy of his trust or investment, all while smiling to my face and pretending to support my dreams. Peterson reached for the official will documents. Based on this evidence and Harold's careful observation of family dynamics, his actual will distributes his estate very differently than the test version you heard earlier. He cleared his throat and began reading, I, Harold James Thompson, being of sound mind and body, do hereby bequeath my estate as follows. The charitable donations remained the same. Harold's commitment to community organizations was genuine and unchanged. To my granddaughter, Amanda Rose Thompson, I leave the sum of exactly $5, and this message, true wealth, comes from character, work ethic, and kindness to others. Until you develop these qualities, money will only amplify your worst tendencies. Amanda's scream could probably be heard in the next building. That's impossible. You can't do this. I was supposed to get $7 million. Peterson continued reading without pause. To my son Richard Thompson and his wife Margaret Thompson, I leave nothing from my estate. They have proven themselves to be manipulative, cruel, and fundamentally dishonest in their treatment of family members. Dad shot to his feet. This is insane. Harold was losing his mind. These recordings are fake. No court will accept this will. Actually, Peterson replied calmly. Mr. Thompson anticipated these challenges. He underwent comprehensive psychological evaluation just 6 months ago, specifically to establish his mental competency for legal purposes. The results show him to be of superior intelligence with excellent judgment and no signs of cognitive decline. He produced a thick medical file. Additionally, the will was witnessed by 3 independent parties notarized properly and filed with this office over a year ago. The test will you heard first was a separate document designed specifically for today's performance. Then who gets the money? Mom demanded, her voice shrill with panic. Peterson turned to me with something that might have been a smile. To my grandson Stephen Harold Thompson, I leave my entire business operation including all 12 store locations, the company headquarters' existing inventory supplier relationships, and established customer base. Current estimated value, $12.3 million. The room spun around me. $12 million. Plus an actual business that I understood and cared about. Harold had not only vindicated me, he'd entrusted me with his life's work. Additionally, Peterson continued, Stephen inherits Harold's personal residence, his investment portfolio, and a business expansion trust fund containing $8.7 million specifically earmarked for growing Thompson hardware into new markets. $21 million total. I owned a multi-million-dollar business. I had the resources to pursue every dream my family had mocked and dismissed. The magnitude of Harold's faith in me was overwhelming. Margaret had started hyperventilating. This can't be happening. Stephen doesn't know anything about running a business. He'll destroy everything Harold built. He'll lose all the money and ruin the family name. Mr. Thompson addressed those concerns. Peterson said, consulting the will, quote, Steve has been learning this business for 8 years. He understands operations, customer service, employee relations, and strategic planning better than anyone else in my family. More importantly, he has the character to treat people fairly and make decisions based on ethics rather than greed. I thought about all those Saturday mornings, all those conversations about profit margins and employee motivation, all those times Harold had asked for my opinions about store layout or inventory management. He hadn't just been making conversation. He'd been training his successor. There's also a personal letter for Stephen, Peterson said, handing me a sealed envelope. Mr. Thompson requested that you read this privately, but he wanted you to know that his faith in you is absolute and unconditional. As I held Harold's final message, Amanda's voice cut through my emotional fog. Stephen, you have to share this with me. We're family. Grandpa wouldn't want you to keep everything while I get nothing. I looked at her. Really looked at her. For the first time in years. The desperation in her eyes was real, but so was the entitlement. Even now, facing the consequences of years of cruel behavior, she believed she deserved a portion of something she'd actively tried to take away from me. Mr. Thompson prepared for this conversation as well. Peterson said, activating the tablet once more. He wanted Stephen to see this particular recording before making any decisions about family relationships. The screen showed another conversation I'd never witnessed, this one from Harold's kitchen during a family barbecue 2 months ago. Amanda and Margaret were helping with food preparation while the men watched football in the living room. Mom, you need to talk to Grandpa about changing his will. Amanda was saying while arranging potato salad on a serving platter. Steve's going to inherit way too much money, and honestly, he doesn't deserve it. He's never done anything special with his life. Margaret nodded while slicing tomatoes. I've been thinking the same thing. Harold's getting sentimental about Steve because he reminds him of himself at that age, but sentiment isn't a good basis for financial decisions. Exactly, Amanda continued. I mean, I love my brother, but let's be realistic. He's 28 years old and still renting an apartment. He drives a 7-year-old Honda. He's never even had a serious girlfriend. What kind of person lives like that if they're supposedly ready for major responsibility? The knife in Margaret's hand paused mid-slice. You know what we need to do? We need to suggest that Harold put Steve in some kind of supervised living situation. Nothing dramatic, but maybe a group home or assisted living facility where he can get the help he obviously needs. My blood turned to ice water. They wanted Harold to have me institutionalized, to remove me from the family entirely so Amanda could inherit everything without competition. That's actually brilliant, Amanda said on the recording. We could frame it as concern for his mental health. Say we're worried about his ability to make good decisions or take care of himself. Once he's out of the picture, Grandpa will see that I'm the logical choice to carry on the family legacy. The video ended with both women laughing about their plan while preparing food for a family gathering, where they'd smile at me and act like loving relatives. Peterson set the tablet aside. Mr. Thompson was particularly disturbed by this conversation. The idea that family members would try to have him declared mentally incompetent and removed from society for their financial benefit crossed lines he didn't know existed. I stared at my mother and sister, seeing them clearly for the first time in my life. They weren't just unsupportive or dismissive. They were actively malicious. They'd been planning to destroy my life to improve their own financial prospects. The most shocking discovery, Peterson continued reading from Harold's notes, was learning that Richard had been researching conservatorship laws and psychiatric hold procedures. He'd actually consulted with an attorney about having Steve declared mentally unfit to manage his own affairs. Dad's face went ashen. That's taken completely out of context. I was just exploring options to help Stephen if he ever needed support. The attorney's notes suggest otherwise, Peterson replied, producing another file. Quote, client seeks to have adult son declared incompetent to prevent inheritance distribution. Discussed fabricating mental health crisis to justify forced psychiatric evaluation. The attorney declined to take the case and recommended your family seek counseling instead. The betrayal was so complete, so calculated, that I couldn't process it emotionally. My own father had been researching legal ways to have me locked up so my sister could steal my inheritance. The cruelty wasn't casual anymore. It was criminal. Peterson produced one final document. Mr. Thompson's last surprise is a signed confession he recorded 3 days before his death. He wanted Stephen to understand the full scope of what was being planned. The tablet activated again, showing Harold sitting in his study, looking directly into the camera with the kind of intensity I remembered from our most serious business conversations. Steve, his recorded voice said, if you're seeing this, it means they went through with the will reading exactly as I expected. By now, you've seen evidence of how your family really treats you when they think no consequences exist. But there's something else you need to know. Harold leaned forward in his chair. 3 days ago, Margaret called me and suggested that you were showing signs of serious mental illness. She said you'd been acting erratically, talking about unrealistic business plans, and displaying symptoms that worried the whole family. She asked me to consider having you evaluated by a psychiatrist with the implication that you might need to be hospitalized for your own safety. My vision blurred with rage. She'd actually tried to convince Harold that I was mentally ill. Of course, I'd seen no evidence of mental illness whatsoever. Harold continued. You've been the most stable, responsible member of this family for years. So I asked Margaret for specific examples of concerning behavior. Her answers revealed that your symptoms included enthusiasm about your job excitement, about future business opportunities, and confidence in your own abilities. Harold's smile was sad, but determined. In other words, Steve, your crime was believing in yourself, despite their efforts to destroy your self-worth. They wanted me to have you committed because you were starting to succeed, in spite of their sabotage. The recording ended, leaving the law office in absolute silence except for Margaret's labored breathing and Amanda's quiet sobbing. I stood up slowly, feeling like I was emerging from underwater after nearly drowning. For 28 years, I'd been gaslit into believing I was the problem in my family. I'd accepted their dismissive treatment, internalized their criticism, and wondered what was wrong with me that I couldn't earn their respect or affection. Now I understood the truth. There had never been anything wrong with me. They were the problem. And Harold had spent his final months collecting evidence to prove it. Peterson wasn't finished with his revelations. He pulled out an even thicker file, this one labeled Financial Investigation Report, in Harold's careful handwriting. Your grandfather hired a private investigator 6 months ago, Peterson explained. The scope was broader than family behavior. Harold wanted to understand exactly how his money had been used by family members over the years. He opened to the first section marked Amanda Thompson, Education Fund Analysis. Amanda, your grandfather established a college fund for you in 2015, depositing $150,000, specifically for tuition books and educational expenses. According to the investigator's report, you withdrew these funds over a 3-year period but spent only $43,000 on actual college costs. Amanda's face went white. That's impossible. College is expensive. Everyone knows that. The investigator tracked your bank records and credit card statements, Peterson continued. $47,000 was spent on luxury vacations. $12,000 went to designer clothing and jewelry. $18,000 covered spa treatments and beauty services. The remaining funds were transferred to Derek's account to help purchase his Porsche. The math was devastating in its clarity. Amanda had stolen over $100,000 from her education fund while lying to Harold about her financial needs. But here's the interesting part, Peterson said. Harold was paying your tuition directly to the university through a separate arrangement. He'd been doing this since your freshman year because he wanted to ensure your education was fully covered regardless of other expenses. This meant Amanda had been taking money twice. Once from the education fund she was stealing from, and again from Harold's direct tuition payments he was making to the school. Grandpa, I can explain. Amanda started, but Peterson held up his hand. There's more. The investigator discovered that Richard had been requesting business loans from Harold for his consulting company. 17 requests over 4 years, each claiming to address temporary cash flow problems. Dad's Adam's apple bobbed as he swallowed hard. Harold understood that consulting work has ups and downs. He was helping family during tough periods. And the investigation revealed that Richard's company was embezzling from clients. Peterson stated flatly, Harold's loans weren't covering cash flow problems. They were being used to replace stolen money and avoid criminal prosecution. I watched my father's face crumble as his secret was exposed. He'd been stealing from his own clients, then borrowing from Harold to cover his tracks. No wonder he'd been so confident about inheriting money. He desperately needed it to avoid prison. Additionally, Peterson continued, the investigator found evidence that Margaret had been using Harold's name and reputation to gain access to exclusive social clubs and business networks while simultaneously bad-mouthing him behind his back. He produced a stack of recorded phone conversations. These recordings were obtained legally through Harold's business phone system, which Margaret used for personal calls during store visits. In them, she refers to Harold as nouveau riche, embarrassingly common, and someone who doesn't understand real class. One recording captured Mom telling someone, Harold thinks running hardware stores makes him a businessman, But real entrepreneurs don't get their hands dirty with retail. It's frankly embarrassing when people ask about my father-in-law's work. Another conversation revealed her strategy. I use his name to get into these clubs, but once I'm established, I distance myself from his background. People understand that sometimes you have to work with family money even when the source isn't ideal. The hypocrisy was staggering. She'd been using Harold's success to elevate her social status, while simultaneously being ashamed of how he'd earned his wealth. The investigator's final discovery, Peterson said, relates to conversations about Steve's future. Over the past 2 years, your parents and Amanda had multiple discussions about removing Steve from Harold's life entirely. He activated the tablet again, showing a recording from Harold's living room that I recognized as being from Christmas Eve last year. We need to be strategic about this, Richard was saying while Amanda and Margaret arranged presents under the tree. Harold's getting older and he's becoming too attached to Steve's potential. We need to create some distance there. Margaret nodded while adjusting ornaments. The problem is that Steve spends too much time with Harold. All those Saturday mornings at the store, all those business conversations. Harold's developing unrealistic expectations about Steve's abilities. Amanda looked up from gift wrapping. What if we planned more family activities that didn't include Steve, like weekend trips or dinners out? Just tell him they're adults only or couples only events. The systematic exclusion I'd experienced suddenly made sense. All those family gatherings I'd been told about after the fact, all those spontaneous dinners that happened to occur when I was working, all those weekend trips that somehow never had room for one more person. We also need to be more aggressive about highlighting Steve's limitations when Harold's around, Richard continued. Not mean-spirited, just realistic observations about his lack of ambition, his simple lifestyle choices, his inability to maintain serious relationships. Margaret smiled while hanging a stocking. I've been working on that. Every time Steve mentions work or future plans, I make sure to put things in perspective for Harold. Comments about the difference between jobs and careers, observations about personality types, gentle suggestions that some people are followers rather than leaders. I remembered every single one of those comments. Each one had felt like a small paper cut at the time, but watching them being planned as a coordinated campaign of psychological warfare was nauseating. The goal, Amanda added, is to make Grandpa realize that giving Steve significant responsibility would actually be cruel to him, like setting him up for failure. Frame it as protecting Steve from himself. They'd been gaslighting Harold about me, while simultaneously gaslighting me about myself. A two-pronged attack designed to isolate me from the one family member who actually valued my potential. Mr. Thompson was particularly disturbed by this recording, Peterson noted, because it revealed premeditation. This wasn't casual family dysfunction. It was a calculated campaign to manipulate his perceptions and decisions. The tablet showed one more scene, this one from just 6 weeks ago. I could see Harold sitting in his favorite chair while my family bustled around his kitchen, preparing what they'd told me was a small family dinner I wasn't invited to because they were discussing private matters. Harold were worried about Stephen, Margaret was saying while bringing him a cup of coffee. He's been talking about some pretty unrealistic ideas lately, and we're concerned he might be losing touch with reality. Harold looked up sharply. What kind of ideas? Well, he mentioned wanting to start his own business, Richard replied. Not just any business, but something involving multiple locations and significant investment. For someone who's never managed more than a few employees, that kind of thinking suggests poor judgment. Amanda joined the conversation from the kitchen. He also talks about you like you're his business mentor, Grandpa. But we all know you're just being kind when you let him help at the store. He doesn't realize that your patience with him isn't the same as seeing real potential. I watched Harold's face on the recording as he processed these lies. His expression shifted from concern to confusion, to something approaching anger. Has Stephen said anything specific about unrealistic plans? Harold asked. He mentioned the regional manager position like it was some kind of major achievement, Margaret replied. Retail management isn't exactly a stepping stone to entrepreneurship. We're worried he's developing delusions of grandeur. The recording showed Harold standing up abruptly. I think this conversation is over. Steve's career progress is impressive. His business understanding is sophisticated, and his ideas about entrepreneurship are both realistic and well-researched. Richard tried to interrupt, but Harold continued, What concerns me is that his own family seems determined to undermine his confidence and minimize his achievements. That kind of behavior is far more troubling than anything Steve has ever done. The video ended with my family exchanging uncomfortable glances while Harold walked out of his own living room. This recording, Peterson explained, betrayal was made just 43 days before Harold's death. It was the final evidence he needed to confirm his estate planning decisions. I realized that Harold had died, knowing exactly who my family really was, and he'd spent his last weeks preparing to protect me from their manipulation and cruelty. Peterson produced one final document from the investigator's report. The most serious discovery involves Richard's business practices. The embezzlement extends beyond what we initially discussed. Dad's face went completely white. You can't prove anything. Harold's investigator was violating privacy laws. Whatever they found won't hold up in court. Actually, the investigation was completely legal, Peterson replied. Harold hired the investigator to examine financial records for accounts where he was a co-signer or guarantor. Since Harold had guaranteed some of Richard's business loans, he had legal right to review the company's financial activity. The investigator had uncovered $230,000 in client funds that Richard had stolen over 18 months. The loans from Harold weren't just covering cash flow. They were preventing Richard from facing federal embezzlement charges. Harold's final decision, Peterson read from the will, was to include this evidence in a sealed package that would be turned over to federal authorities if Richard contested the will or attempted to claim any portion of the estate. Dad slumped in his chair like a deflated balloon. Not only was he cut out of Harold's will, he was facing potential prison time if he tried to fight it. There's one more revelation. Peterson said, his voice carrying a weight that made everyone sit up straighter. He activated the tablet one final time, showing Harold in his study just days before his death. This recording had the quality of a final confession, something Harold needed to say before he died. Steve, Harold's image said, looking directly into the camera, there's something your family doesn't know that I think you should understand. Your adoption. The word hit me like a physical blow. Adoption. Your biological parents were killed in a car accident when you were 6 months old, Harold continued. Richard and Margaret adopted you through a private agency, but they never intended to treat you as their real son. They wanted the tax benefits and social recognition of raising an orphan, but they resented having a child that wasn't biologically theirs. Everything suddenly made sense. The constant comparison to Amanda, the feeling that I never quite belonged, the sense that my achievements were somehow less valid than hers. Amanda has always known, Harold said. They told her when she was old enough to understand, but they swore her to secrecy. They wanted her to feel special as their real child while treating you as a charity case they'd taken on. I stared at Amanda, who couldn't meet my eyes. She'd known my entire life that I was adopted, that my parents weren't really my parents, that my entire identity was built on a lie. The cruelest part, Harold continued, is that your biological parents were wonderful people. Your father was a mechanical engineer, your mother was a teacher. They were saving money to start their own educational consulting business when they died. You didn't inherit character from Richard and Margaret. You inherited it from parents who valued integrity, hard work, and treating others with kindness. Harold leaned forward in his chair. Steve, you were never the disappointment in this family. You were the reminder that good character doesn't require biological connection. Your real parents would be incredibly proud of the man you've become, despite being raised by people who never truly accepted you as their own. The recording ended, leaving me sitting in a law office staring at people who had lied to me about my most basic identity for 28 years. Something fundamental shifted inside me as I processed Harold's final revelation. The hurt, confused young man who had walked into this office was gone, replaced by someone with steel in his backbone and clarity in his vision. I stood up slowly, feeling like I was emerging from a fog that had clouded my judgment for nearly 3 decades. Moppy, Stephen, sweetheart? Mom started, her voice taking on that manipulative tone she used when she needed to control damage. You have to understand that we were protecting you from painful truths. We wanted you to feel like part of the family. I looked at her, really looked at her, for the first time in my adult life. The woman who had raised me, fed me, and clothed me, but had never actually loved me. The woman who had spent 27 years systematically destroying my confidence while pretending it was for my own good. Mr. Peterson, I said, my voice carrying a new authority that silenced the room. I want to proceed with pressing charges against Richard for embezzlement. I also want to pursue civil action against Amanda for theft of the education funds. Please prepare whatever legal documents are necessary. Stephen, you can't be serious, Dad said, panic creeping into his voice. I'm your father. Families don't send each other to prison. You're not my father, I replied calmly. You adopted me as a tax write-off and spent the next 27 years making sure I knew I wasn't really wanted. Harold was more of a father to me than you ever were. Margaret started crying, but they were manipulative tears designed to make me feel guilty for standing up for myself. Stephen, please don't let anger make you do something you'll regret. We can work through this as a family. We can go to counseling, have honest conversations, start over. Start over. I turned to face her fully. You tried to convince Harold to have me committed to a mental institution so Amanda could inherit my share of his estate. You actively campaigned to isolate me from the one family member who saw my potential. You lied about my identity for my entire life. What exactly would we be starting over from? Amanda finally found her voice. Steve, I know this looks bad, but family is supposed to forgive each other. Yes, we made mistakes, but we can fix this. I'll pay back the money I took. I'll admit I was wrong about everything. Maywipe, you'll pay it back with what money? I asked. The $7 million you thought you were inheriting. The money you were already spending in your head before Harold's body was even cold. Peterson cleared his throat. Stephen, I should mention that Harold's will includes specific provisions for exactly this situation. He anticipated that your family might attempt reconciliation once they realized the consequences of their behavior. He produced another section of the will I hadn't heard yet. Quote, if my family attempts to reconcile with Steve after learning about their disinheritance, he should understand that this represents grief over lost money, not genuine remorse for their treatment of him. True character change requires consequences, not forgiveness that enables continued abuse. Harold had thought of everything. Even from the grave, he was protecting me from my own tendency to excuse their behavior and hope for genuine change. Awai, Mr. Peterson, say now? I continued. Please also prepare a restraining order, preventing any family member from interfering with business operations or harassing me during the transition period. I want legal protection while I take control of Thompson Hardware. Stephen, that's completely unnecessary, Richard protested. We would never interfere with Harold's business. We respect what he built. You mean you respect what you thought you might inherit? I corrected. The same business you told people was embarrassing and beneath your social status. The same company you said I was too incompetent to understand, let alone manage. I turned to Peterson. Is there anything else I need to know about the inheritance? Any other conditions or requirements Harold included? Actually, yes, Peterson said, consulting his notes. Harold included a detailed transition plan for taking control of the business. He wanted to ensure your success wasn't left to chance. He handed me a sealed envelope marked Business Transition Guide. Inside were step-by-step instructions for everything from meeting key suppliers to understanding the company's financial structure. Harold had spent months preparing me to succeed, even while my family was planning my failure. There's also this, Peterson said, producing a set of keys. Harold wanted you to have immediate access to his house, the business headquarters, and all company vehicles. He felt it was important for you to establish your authority quickly and decisively. The keys felt heavy in my hand, weighted with responsibility and opportunity in equal measure. I owned 12 hardware stores, a distribution network, supplier relationships built over decades, and the respect of employees who had worked with Harold for years. Additionally, Peterson continued, Harold arranged for his longtime business manager, Patricia Williams, to work with you during the transition. She's been running day-to-day operations since Harold's health declined, and she's eager to help you take full control. I thought about Patricia, who had always treated me with professional respect during my Saturday visits to the stores. She knew the business inside and out, and Harold trusted her judgment completely. Having her support would make the transition much smoother than trying to figure everything out alone. Stephen? Amanda said, desperation making her voice crack. You have to give us something. We're family. We raised you. We can't just be left with nothing. You're getting exactly what you gave me, I replied. Nothing but the opportunity to earn your own way through honest work and good character. Harold was right. Some lessons can't be learned without consequences. Margaret stood up abruptly, her sadness transforming into rage. This is ridiculous. Harold was a senile old man who let a manipulative grandson trick him into changing his will. No court will honor this nonsense. Actually, Peterson said mildly, Harold anticipated that argument as well. The psychological evaluation I mentioned earlier specifically tested for susceptibility to manipulation. The results show that Harold had superior resistance to influence attempts and made his estate planning decisions based entirely on objective evidence and careful observation. He produced the psychological report thick with test results and professional analysis. Dr. Elizabeth Morrison concluded that Harold possessed exceptional clarity of thought, strong analytical skills, and the ability to separate emotional attachment from practical decision-making. She found no evidence of cognitive decline, depression, or any condition that would impair his judgment. Then who's going to run the business? Richard demanded. Stephen doesn't know anything about managing 12 stores, dealing with suppliers, handling payroll, or making strategic decisions. Harold addressed that concern extensively. Peterson replied, pulling out another file. Steve has been learning business operations for 8 years. He understands inventory management, customer service, employee relations, profit margins, marketing strategies, and operational efficiency. More importantly, he has the character traits necessary for ethical leadership. Harold had documented every conversation we'd shared, every lesson he'd taught me, every observation I'd made about improving store operations. The file was like a college transcript showing years of practical business education. Furthermore, Peterson continued, Harold arranged for a business advisory board consisting of his accountant, his lawyer, his most experienced store managers, and 2 successful entrepreneurs from the community. They'll meet with Stephen monthly for the first year to provide guidance and ensure smooth operations. It was overwhelming to realize how thoroughly Harold had prepared for my success. He hadn't just left me a business. He'd created an entire support system to help me thrive. But Peterson wasn't finished. The most significant protection Harold arranged was this. He produced a document that looked like a legal contract. This is a comprehensive restraining order that Harold had pre-signed and filed with the court system. It prevents any family member from interfering with business operations, contacting employees, approaching suppliers, or harassing Stephen in any way during the transition period. I stared at the document. Harold had literally protected me from my family's predictable attempts at sabotage and manipulation. The restraining order includes financial protections as well, Peterson explained. If any family member attempts to claim ownership of business assets, interfere with banking relationships, or disrupt operations in any way, they face immediate civil penalties and potential criminal charges. Margaret's face had gone pale again. He can't control us from the grave. We have rights. You have the same rights Harold left you, Peterson replied calmly. The right to remain silent and the right to build new lives based on your own efforts, rather than inherited wealth you didn't earn. Amanda made one last desperate attempt. Stephen, please, I know we haven't been perfect, but we're still family. Can't we at least try to work something out? Maybe I could work for the company, prove that I've changed. I looked at her carefully, searching for any sign of genuine remorse or real understanding of what she'd done. But her desperation was still fundamentally selfish. She wasn't sorry for hurting me. She was sorry for getting caught and losing money. Amanda, I said quietly, if you want to prove you've changed, do it with your own life and your own choices. Get a job, pay your own bills, build something meaningful through your own efforts. If you become a different person over time, maybe we can have a different relationship. But that change has to come from you, not from me giving you money you didn't earn. I turned to Richard and Margaret. The same applies to both of you. Harold's evidence shows exactly who you really are when you think no consequences exist. If you want different lives, build them through different choices. But those choices start with accepting responsibility for what you've done, not with expecting forgiveness you haven't earned. Peterson gathered his papers. Stephen Harold wanted you to know that he died proud of the man you became, despite growing up in a family that tried to diminish your potential. He believed you have everything necessary to not only succeed with his business, but to build something even greater. As I walked toward the door of Peterson and Associates, I felt like I was leaving behind not just a law office, but the entire identity I'd carried for 28 years. The confused, insecure young man who had believed his family's assessment of his worth was gone. In his place was someone who owned a multi-million-dollar business, had the respect of employees and community members, and possessed the knowledge and support system necessary to build an even brighter future. Harold's final gift hadn't just been money. It had been truth, and that truth was going to set me free. 6 months after that life-changing day at Peterson and Associates, I stood in the newest Thompson Hardware location in Cedar Grove, watching my newest employee help an elderly customer select the right screws for a home repair project. The patience and genuine care she showed reminded me of everything Harold had tried to teach me about business being fundamentally about serving people, not just making money. The transition had been smoother than I dared hope. Patricia Williams turned out to be exactly the mentor Harold had promised, with an encyclopedic knowledge of operations and a gift for teaching complex business concepts in practical terms. She'd helped me understand everything from supplier negotiations to employee motivation systems, always emphasizing Harold's philosophy that success came from treating people well and maintaining absolute integrity in every transaction. Sales were up 37% across all locations, but more importantly, employee satisfaction had reached an all-time high. I'd implemented Harold's unfinished plans for profit-sharing increased training opportunities and created advancement pathways that gave every worker a chance to develop new skills and take on greater responsibility. My phone buzzed with a text from Patricia. The financial reports for October are ready. Best month in company history. Harold would be proud. Those words meant more to me than any dollar amount could. The success wasn't just professional. I discovered that confidence and self-respect were like muscles that grew stronger with regular exercise. Every good decision I made, every problem I solved effectively, every employee who thanked me for creating a positive work environment reinforced my understanding that Harold had been right about my potential all along. I'd also started dating someone remarkable. Sarah Chen worked as a nonprofit administrator downtown, and we'd met at a community business networking event. She knew nothing about my family drama or my inheritance. She was attracted to my enthusiasm for building something meaningful and my genuine interest in her work helping displaced families find stable housing. "You light up when you talk about your employees," she'd told me on our third date. I've never met someone who cares so much about creating opportunities for other people. That relationship was teaching me what healthy family dynamics looked like. Sarah challenged my ideas respectfully, celebrated my successes genuinely, and offered support during difficult moments without trying to control my decisions or diminish my confidence. My biological family situation had evolved exactly as Harold had predicted. Richard had accepted a plea deal that allowed him to avoid prison time in exchange for full restitution to his victims and 600 hours of community service. He was working at a nonprofit organization that helped small business owners develop ethical financial practices. Ironic given his history, but apparently he was learning genuine work ethic for the first time in his adult life. Stephen. He'd called me 2 months ago, his voice tentative and humble in a way I'd never heard before. "I know I don't deserve to ask for anything, but I wanted you to know that I understand now what Harold was trying to teach us. Working with honest business owners who struggle every day to do the right thing has shown me how far I'd fallen from any kind of decent standard." The conversation had been awkward, but something in his tone suggested genuine remorse rather than manipulation. He wasn't asking for money or favors. He was simply acknowledging the damage he'd done and expressing gratitude that his victims had been willing to accept restitution rather than pressing for maximum criminal penalties. Amanda's transformation had been even more dramatic. Losing her expected inheritance had forced her to confront reality in ways she'd avoided for her entire adult life. She'd taken a job at a retail chain, starting as a floor associate and slowly working her way up to assistant manager. The work was hard, the pay was modest, and the customers could be demanding, all experiences that were completely foreign to someone who'd never faced real responsibility before. "I never understood what you went through," she'd written in a letter last month. "Working every day, having to earn respect through performance, dealing with difficult people while maintaining professional standards. It's exhausting and frustrating and sometimes demoralizing. But it's also the first time in my life that I've felt genuine pride in accomplishing something through my own efforts." She'd also broken up with Derek, whose response to her financial reversal had revealed the shallow nature of their relationship. "He disappeared the minute he realized I wasn't going to inherit millions," she'd written. "I guess I finally understand the difference between someone who loves you and someone who loves your potential bank account." Amanda had asked if she could work part-time at one of Thompson Hardware's locations, not for family reasons, but to learn business operations from someone she'd finally recognized as genuinely competent. I'd agreed to let her start in the stockroom of our smallest store, with the understanding that she'd receive no special treatment and would advance only through demonstrated merit. Margaret's journey had been the most difficult to watch. Losing her expected financial security had triggered something close to a nervous breakdown, requiring several months of intensive therapy and medication to stabilize her mental health. But slowly, she'd begun to understand how her need to control others and maintain social status had poisoned her relationships with her own family. "I spent so many years worried about what other people thought of our family that I forgot to actually love the people in it," she'd told me during a carefully structured conversation we'd had last month. "I was so afraid that your achievements weren't impressive enough to reflect well on us that I never celebrated your actual accomplishments or tried to understand who you really were." She'd started volunteering at the same children's hospital that Harold had supported, working with families of kids who faced long-term medical challenges. The experience of helping people cope with genuine hardship had given her perspective on what really mattered in life. Those families deal with life and death struggles every day, she'd said. They taught me that having a son who works hard, treats people kindly, and builds something meaningful is actually the greatest blessing a parent could ask for. I'm ashamed that it took losing everything for me to understand that. None of these changes had happened quickly or easily. Each family member had fought against accepting responsibility for their behavior, and there had been setbacks and relapses along the way. But slowly, consequences had forced growth in ways that forgiveness and enabling never could have. The business expansion had exceeded even Harold's optimistic projections. I'd opened 2 new locations, hired 35 additional employees, and established relationships with 3 new supplier networks that had improved our inventory selection while reducing costs. The $8.7 million expansion fund that Harold had left me was being invested strategically in markets where local hardware stores could provide personal service that big box retailers couldn't match. More importantly, I'd created the kind of workplace culture that Harold had always envisioned. Employees had input on store layout and inventory decisions. Training programs helped people develop skills that made them more valuable both within our company and in the broader job market. Profit sharing meant that everyone benefited when locations performed well, creating natural incentives for excellent customer service and efficient operations. This is what business should look like, Patricia had told me recently. Harold always said that companies succeed long-term when they create value for everyone: customers, employees, suppliers, and the community. You've built exactly that kind of organization. But perhaps the most meaningful development had been my expansion of Harold's scholarship program. Learning about my biological parents' background in education had inspired me to fund college scholarships specifically for students from difficult family situations who showed promise in business or education fields. The application essays were heartbreaking and inspiring in equal measure. Young people writing about overcoming neglect, abuse, or abandonment to pursue dreams that their families had dismissed or actively sabotaged. Each scholarship recipient reminded me of my own journey from family scapegoat to successful business owner. "These kids have the same strength you showed," Sarah had observed after reading some of the applications with me. "They're not letting toxic family dynamics define their potential. Your scholarship program is giving them the same chance Harold gave you, the opportunity to succeed based on their character and effort rather than their family circumstances." I'd also discovered unexpected support from the broader business community. Other entrepreneurs who had heard about Thompson Hardware's success and ethical practices had reached out to offer mentorship, partnership opportunities, and friendship. For the first time in my life, I was surrounded by people who shared Harold's values and understood that business success meant more than just accumulating wealth. "You're building the kind of reputation that takes decades to establish," one mentor had told me. "Your grandfather's legacy of integrity, combined with your innovation and energy, is creating something really special in this industry." The most surprising development had been an approach from a regional business development group that wanted to feature Thompson Hardware as a case study in sustainable growth and ethical employment practices. They were interested in how we'd achieved such significant expansion while maintaining high employee satisfaction and community involvement. "What you've accomplished in 6 months is remarkable," the lead researcher had told me. "But what's really impressive is that your success is built on treating people well rather than exploiting market advantages. That's the kind of business model that creates long-term value for everyone involved." Standing in the Cedar Grove location, watching customers and employees interact with mutual respect and genuine helpfulness, I felt Harold's presence as strongly as if he were standing right beside me. Every decision I made was guided by lessons he'd taught me during those Saturday morning conversations that my family had dismissed as insignificant. The day ended with our usual closing routine: checking inventory, reviewing sales figures, and making sure the store was ready for tomorrow's customers. But as I locked up and walked to my car, I couldn't help but smile at how dramatically my life had changed. 6 months ago, I'd been a struggling retail manager living in a tiny apartment, convinced that my family's assessment of my limitations was accurate. Tonight, I was the owner of a thriving business empire, surrounded by people who respected my judgment and valued my leadership. But the transformation went deeper than financial success or professional recognition. I'd finally learned to see myself through Harold's eyes rather than through my family's distorted perspective. The strength, intelligence, and integrity he'd recognized in me had been there all along. I just needed someone to believe in those qualities long enough for me to recognize them myself. Harold's final test hadn't just revealed my family's true character, it had revealed my own potential. And that potential was still growing, still expanding, still surprising me with what was possible when someone refused to accept other people's limitations as their own truth. 1 year after that devastating and ultimately liberating day at Peterson and Associates, I found myself back in a familiar place. Harold's old office at the original Thompson Hardware location on Maple Street. But everything had changed, including me. The office had been remodeled and expanded with new technology for inventory management and customer relationship tracking. Photos on the walls showed all 12 store locations, their employees, and community events we'd sponsored. Harold's desk remained exactly where it had always been. But now it served as a reminder of legacy rather than loss. I was reviewing applications for our newest scholarship recipients when Sarah knocked on the doorframe. "The celebration committee wants to know if you're ready for the big announcement," she said, smiling, in that way that made me grateful every day for the courage to build genuine relationships based on mutual respect rather than family obligation. Today marked the 1-year anniversary of Thompson Hardware's record-breaking expansion. But more importantly, it was the day we were announcing the Harold Thompson Foundation for Youth Development, a permanent endowment that would provide college scholarships, business mentorship, and family counseling services for young people from dysfunctional family situations. "I still can't believe how much we've accomplished," I told Sarah as we walked toward the community room where employees, customers, and local business leaders had gathered for the announcement ceremony. The numbers were impressive by any measure. Thompson Hardware now operated 15 locations across 5 counties, employed over 200 people, and had achieved recognition as one of the region's fastest-growing businesses. Our profit-sharing program had distributed nearly $400,000 to employees over the past year, and our starting wages were 30% above industry averages. But the statistics that mattered most to me were different. Employee turnover had dropped to nearly zero. Customer satisfaction scores consistently ranked in the top 5% nationally. Every store location had become a community gathering place where people came not just to buy supplies, but to get advice on projects, connect with neighbors, and feel part of something meaningful. "You've created exactly what Harold envisioned," Patricia told me as we prepared for the ceremony. "A business that succeeds by making other people's lives better. That's the rarest kind of entrepreneurship, and it's why your success feels sustainable rather than accidental." As the ceremony began, I looked out at faces that had become genuinely important to me. Employees who had become friends and colleagues rather than just workers. Customers who trusted Thompson Hardware not just for quality products, but for honest advice and fair prices. Community members who saw our business as an asset to their neighborhoods rather than just another retail operation. But scattered throughout the crowd were 3 faces that represented the most complex part of my journey: Richard, Margaret, and Amanda. Their presence wasn't entirely comfortable, but it was genuine. Each of them had spent the past year confronting the consequences of their choices and slowly building new identities based on character rather than entitlement. Richard had completed his community service and restitution payments, but more importantly, he discovered a talent for helping other entrepreneurs avoid the ethical pitfalls that had nearly destroyed his life. His work with the nonprofit had evolved into a consulting practice focused on financial accountability and business ethics. "I'll never stop being ashamed of what I did," he told me recently. "But I'm grateful for the chance to use that experience to help other people make better choices." Harold was right that consequences can be teachers if we're willing to learn from them. Amanda had been promoted to shift supervisor at Thompson Hardware's smallest location, earning the position through consistent performance and genuine leadership development. Working in retail had taught her lessons about customer service, inventory management, and employee relations that her expensive college education had never covered. "I understand now why you loved working with Grandpa," she'd said during our last conversation. "Business isn't just about money. It's about solving problems for people and creating opportunities for everyone involved. I never realized how satisfying it could be to build something meaningful through your own efforts." Margaret had perhaps traveled the farthest emotionally. Her volunteer work at the Children's Hospital had evolved into a full-time position in family services, helping parents cope with the stress of long-term medical challenges. The experience had given her genuine empathy for the first time in her adult life. "Working with families who face real crises taught me how much energy I wasted on superficial concerns," she'd explained. "Those parents don't care about social status or financial competition. They care about love, support, and hope. I'm ashamed that it took me 60 years to understand what actually matters in family relationships." None of these transformations had been easy or linear. There had been setbacks, arguments, and moments when I'd wondered if genuine change was possible. But slowly, the consequences Harold had designed into his will had forced each family member to confront their character and make different choices. The most significant change had been in our family dynamics. We weren't close in the traditional sense. Too much damage had been done for that kind of easy intimacy. But we were honest with each other for the first time, and that honesty had created space for respect and gradual trust building. "We can't undo the past," I told them during a family dinner 6 months ago in Son Albiu, "but we can choose what kind of future we want to build together. That future depends on your choices, not my forgiveness or generosity." As I stood up to address the anniversary celebration, I thought about Harold's final letter, the one Peterson had given me to read privately after the will reading. In it, Harold had written something that had guided every major decision I'd made over the past year. "Steve, the greatest gift I can give you isn't money or business success. It's the understanding that you have value independent of other people's recognition or approval. Your character, work ethic, and capacity for kindness make you worthy of respect and love. Never let anyone convince you otherwise, including yourself." To my line, friends, employees, and community members, I began looking out at the gathered crowd. 1 year ago, I inherited more than a business from my grandfather, Harold Thompson. I inherited a philosophy about what business success should look like and what responsibilities come with financial resources. I talked about Harold's vision of companies that succeeded by creating value for everyone: customers who received quality products, and honest service employees who earned fair wages, and opportunities for growth suppliers who built lasting relationships based on mutual benefit, and communities that became stronger through ethical business practices. "But the most important thing Harold taught me," I continued, "was that family isn't just about blood relationships. Real family consists of people who support your growth, celebrate your achievements, and stand by you during difficult times. Sometimes those people share your DNA, and sometimes they don't. What matters is the character they demonstrate and the love they show through their actions." I announced the Harold Thompson Foundation with its initial endowment of $2 million, enough to provide full college scholarships for 20 students annually, while funding family counseling services and business mentorship programs. Harold believed that young people with character and determination could overcome any family circumstances if they received the right support and opportunities. I explained, This foundation will ensure that financial resources are never the barrier that prevents someone from building a meaningful life. As the ceremony concluded and people gathered for refreshments and conversation, Sarah found me standing quietly in Harold's old office. "How are you feeling about everything?" she asked, settling into the chair across from Harold's desk. "Grateful," I said, and realized the word captured something I'd never quite experienced before. Not just for the business success, Sabine, or financial security, but for understanding that my worth isn't determined by other people's approval or acceptance. I thought about the young man who had walked into Peterson and Associates 1 year ago, desperate for family acceptance, and crushed by their rejection. That person had been so focused on earning love from people who were incapable of giving it, that he'd never recognized the love and respect he'd already earned from people like Harold Patricia and the employees who had worked with him every Saturday. Harold's test wasn't cruel, I continued. It was merciful. By forcing my family's true character into the open when I was still young enough to build a different life, he gave me the freedom to stop chasing approval from people who would never value me appropriately. Sarah nodded thoughtfully. "And now you're surrounded by people who see your actual worth rather than some distorted version based on their own insecurities and limitations." That evening, I visited Harold's grave for the first time since the anniversary of his death. The headstone was simple but elegant. Harold James Thompson, built more than a business-built character. "I hope you're proud of what we've accomplished," I said, placing fresh flowers on the grave. "Not just the business success, but the lives we've been able to change through scholarship programs and ethical employment practices." Standing there in the quiet cemetery, I felt a profound sense of completion. The broken young man who had left Peterson and Associates 1 year ago had been replaced by someone who understood his own value, surrounded himself with people who shared his principles, and built something meaningful that would outlast his own lifetime. Harold's final gift hadn't been money or business ownership. It had been truth. The truth about my family's character, about my own potential, and about what really matters in building a life worth living. That truth had set me free to become the person I was always meant to be, unencumbered by other people's limitations or expectations. And that freedom was the foundation for everything else I would build in the years ahead. As I walked back to my car, I pulled out my phone and scrolled through dozens of messages from employees, customers, scholarship recipients, and community members who had heard about the foundation announcement. Each message represented a life that had been touched by Harold's vision and my commitment to carrying it forward. But the message that meant the most came from Patricia. "Harold knew exactly what he was doing when he chose you to carry on his legacy. Tonight's announcement proves that his faith in your character was completely justified." 6 months later, I proposed to Sarah in Harold's original store on Maple Street, surrounded by employees who had become family and community members who had become friends. She said yes, of course, but more importantly, she said she was proud to be joining a family built on choice and character rather than obligation and DNA. Our wedding was small but meaningful, held in the community room of Thompson Hardware's newest location. Richard walked me down the aisle not because tradition demanded it, but because he had earned the right through genuine change and demonstrated love. Margaret and Amanda served as greeters, welcoming guests with the kind of warmth and hospitality they'd learned through their own journeys of character development. Harold would have loved seeing his business become the setting for a celebration of love built on mutual respect and shared values. He'd always said that the best businesses became community gathering places where people's most important moments could unfold. As Sarah and I exchanged vows, I thought about Harold's definition of success: building something that makes other people's lives better while staying true to your own principles. We had built exactly that kind of life together, surrounded by people who chose to be family rather than people who simply shared genetic material. The reception featured toasts from employees who had become entrepreneurs themselves, scholarship recipients who were pursuing their educational dreams, and community members whose lives had been improved by Thomson Hardware's commitment to ethical business practices. But the toast that moved me most came from Harold's old business partner, who had traveled from 3 states away to be part of our celebration. Harold always said that Steve had the rarest combination of business intelligence and genuine character. Tonight, surrounded by all the lives you've touched and improved, we can see that Harold's assessment was completely accurate. You've built exactly the kind of life and legacy that Harold hoped for when he took that brave risk of telling you the truth about your family and your own potential. As Sarah and I danced our first dance as husband and wife, I realized that Harold's greatest gift hadn't been the business or the money. It had been the courage to show me who I really was when all the false family narratives were stripped away. That courage had given me permission to build a life based on my actual character rather than other people's expectations. And that life had turned out to be more meaningful, more successful, and more deeply satisfying than anything I could have imagined when I was still trying to earn love from people who were incapable of giving it. Standing there with Sarah in my arms, surrounded by people who had chosen to be part of our lives, I finally understood what Harold had been trying to teach me all along. The family you build is more important than the family you're born into. And the person you choose to become is more significant than the circumstances you come from. Harold's test had revealed not just my family's character, but my own strength. And that strength had become the foundation for everything beautiful that followed. Now, as you listen to this story, I want to ask you something important. Have you ever had to choose between staying loyal to people who don't value you and building relationships with people who see your real worth? How did you find the courage to demand better treatment from the people in your life? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Your experience might help someone else who's struggling with similar family dynamics or toxic relationships. And if this story resonated with you, please hit that like button to help other people find it. Don't forget to subscribe for more stories about overcoming difficult circumstances and building meaningful success. Finally, please share this with anyone who might benefit from understanding that their worth isn't determined by other people's ability to recognize it. Thank you for listening to my story, and I hope it inspires you to build the kind of life you truly deserve, surrounded by people who celebrate your authentic self, rather than trying to diminish it. Remember, sometimes the greatest gift someone can give you is showing you who they really are, even when that truth is painful. That clarity creates space for genuine love and respect to flourish.